Hey there and welcome back. This is Felix from Goldamer Vintage Watches. First of all, the following watch commercials do not reflect our personal opinion. It is important for us to emphasize this beforehand because they contain, among other things, violence, the killing of animals, and sexism. For example, check out this Timex commercial from 1969. Electrify your wife, $50. Underneath it reads, among other things, not only will you make her very happy, but you may also make her much more punctual. With an electric Timex, she'll never be late again because you forgot to wind her watch. And isn't $50 a small price to pay for a woman who is worth waiting for, but who won't keep you waiting? Yes, I can imagine you have to let that sink in. But whether we like such statements or not, it is a piece of history that is worth seeing for everyone. Take a look at this Camel cigarette ad from 1946. More doctors smoke Camel than any other cigarette. Sure, it is not a watch commercial, but it shows that times are changing. Remember that some of the commercials we see today will cause people to be upset or find them offensive in a few decades. On the other hand, there were also super clever, kitschy, funny and cheeky ads back then, which made them catchy and effective. Today, we just want to show you how and why advertising used to be the way it was. So enjoy the following ads and take them in a lighthearted way. So let's start with a little history trip. Modern watch advertising seems to rely heavily on two things: the past or celebrity, like Erling Haaland for this Breitling ad. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. If your watch has been to the moon or is worn by a famous athlete or movie star, you'd be crazy not to take advantage of that. But somehow I find it a pity and a little bit boring, because the past shows such a variety of creative and funny possibilities. For example, just check out the following Swatch commercial from the 80s.
Very nice. Thanks. Yours is nice too. Thanks.
Hands worth watching. How incredibly funny is this commercial? In my opinion, definitely a masterpiece that sticks in my head. But it is also a matter of taste, and maybe some of you are shaking your heads right now. Understandably, watch manufacturers these days want to be associated with luxury and high craftsmanship, not with the toilet. It's also interesting to know that the first legal television commercial in the world was aired in 1941 during a game between the Brooklyn Dodgers and the Philadelphia Phillies. It was a commercial for Bulova watches. This 10-second commercial cost between $4 and $9 to produce, and since only 1% of the US households owned a television at this time, it didn't necessarily mean anything big in terms of sales. Still, nearly 4,000 people saw the commercial when it first aired, and it completely revolutionized the future of advertising. But at the beginning of the 20th century, so 40 years before the first television commercial, advertising and marketing interested no one. Watchmakers simply relied on the word of mouth and the fact that the precision of their timepieces was the best business card they could have. That changed, however, when Rolex founder Hans Wilsdorf had a bold idea. He arranged for the English swimmer Mercedes Gleitze in 1927 to wear Rolex's new waterproof watch, the Oyster, during her daring 10-hour swim across the English Channel and advertise her triumph on the front page of London's Daily Mail. Sure, there had been advertisements for watches for decades, but few, if any, were memorable. One can name this sporting event as a starting shot of watch advertising as we know today. Just as watchmaking has undergone a fascinating evolution over the last century, so has the advertising. That it has made it famous around the world. The messages certainly changed as the way they are communicated. So now, when we look back, some of these commercials fill us with a sense of nostalgia, others with humor, while others seem a little dated or even very, very out of date, like the following IWC ads. At the beginning of the 21st century, IWC launched a very offensive campaign. Keep in mind that these ads are from 2006 and not, as one might think, from the 70s or 80s. Whether they are offensive or distasteful depends on our own interpretations. Often seen on stewardess beside tables. Beside the tagline, the ad describes the watch as engineered for men, not infrequently spotted in bedrooms, and says its 7-day power reserve means you can afford to stay in bed that little bit longer than usual. Another ads from this campaign are equality of the sexes has to stop somewhere. Almost complicated as a woman, except it's on time. At least there's one thing men can rely on. Ladies, you ride our Harleys, smoke our Havanas, drink our Glenmorangie, hands off our IWC. Of course, this campaign caused a lot of outrage and criticism, but still was used in a weak-knit form until a few years ago, like this ad from 2014. Engineered for men who would never link spa with wellness. Whether offensive or not, it certainly caused a buzz. And at the same time, IWC also created some of my favorite non-offensive watch ads at the time. Creative, around the corner, funny and innovative, as advertising should be, no matter what product. Check out this brainchild. The big pilot's watches are attached to the hanging straps on buses, so anyone who wants to can just try on the big pilot's watch on the way to the plane. This professional campaign called Hanging Straps was released in June 2006. This is an incredibly clever way of getting potential customers to try on your watch. IWC showed with the following advertisements that it was possible to impress future customers with their watches even without offensive advertising. If this watch stops, please call a doctor. It means you haven't moved for 7 days. The reason why fish swim with their mouths open. Or handle without care. Have no fear, nothing can touch this watch. My opinion on all this, IWC developed some innovative advertising campaigns over time, but also some that have clearly gone too far. Although IWC has officially apologized, a residue of reputational damage will remain. But Rolex also has a rich advertising history that spans decades. The brand has produced some of the most remarkable commercials ever created by a watch brand. But here too, there were times when the renowned watchmaker relied on offensive advertising methods. Take a look at the evolution of Rolex submarine advertising, for example. Starting with a clear reference as a tool watch, like on this ad from 1957 for divers, the advertising of the sub also took on new message intentions over the years. Here you can see a classic Submariner ad from 1967, so 10 years later than the other ad. If you shipped out on the skate, the Shark or the Nautilus, you'd recognize this face. But just a few years later, in the 1970s, the sub ad already looked like this. We invented the Submariner to work perfectly 660 feet under the sea. It seems to work pretty well at any level. It's a pretty suggestive ad, and I don't think Rolex would do anything similar today. But of course, not to be compared with the IWC ads. We all know that sex sells well, and this old ad underlines that. Furthermore, Rolex produced an iconic series of "If You Would Wear a Rolex" commercials in the 1960s and 70s that are, in my opinion, the best the brand ever created. The ads feature a very clear grid of text and images on a black background. Every single one of these ads contained the message, "If you were ... tomorrow, you'd wear a Rolex." In the iconic Helvetia font. If you were climbing here tomorrow, you'd wear a Rolex. If you hunted big game the world over, you'd wear a Rolex. If you go this kind of action, you'd wear a Rolex. If you were skiing here tomorrow, you'd wear a Rolex. If you were speaking here tomorrow, you'd wear a Rolex. If you were navigating here tomorrow, you'd wear a Rolex. In addition, we have picked out a few musing ads for you, which have entertained us. At the beginning of the video, we already showed you a TV commercial from Swatch, but also their print media from the 1980s didn't have to hide. These ads were cleverly funny and also cheeky. The contrast of the cool timepieces with the cheesy pictures and awkward catchphrases ensure that the ads were memorable and effective. Since we got a Swatch, my girls get to bed on time, and they were very popular too. Since we got a Swatch, we always get to Grandma's house on time and leave it sooner too. Since we got a Swatch, life is a beach and our men are manlier too. Seiko also always found innovative ways to draw attention to their products. Particularly famous was the advertisement from the 1970s with the slogan, "The world's first interview with a Seiko chronograph." In my opinion, it's a fun way to promote their then newly released watch. rather than just reading through long paragraphs, which can sometimes feel like you listening to a boring pitch from an inexperienced salesperson. However, this format is entertaining and informative. So let's move on to the last commercial for today. In 2010, an incredible, almost unbelievable advertisement from Hublot exploded like a virtual bomb on the internet. Bernie Ecclestone, the then 81-year-old head of the Formula One world, was heavily attacked by thieves looking for money during a robbery at his home. Judging by his injuries, the elderly English statesman must have fought like a lion. In the end, the attackers took his watch, a Hublot F1 King Power. I wouldn't make light of someone getting beat up for his watch. However, the ad was Ecclestone's own idea. Unfortunately, this brings us to the end of today's video. I hope the topic has entertained you, and yeah, have a great day and hope to see you in our next video.